The clamor of horses' hooves and creaking wagon wheels filled the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Beatrice Vance stumbled backward, her sapphire blue dress collecting dirt when rough hands shoved her forcefully into the busy thoroughfare. Tears streamed down her face, leaving clean trails through the dust on her cheeks as a stagecoach barreled toward her, the driver shouting frantically as he pulled on the reins. "Watch yourself." Came the warning cries, but Beatrice remained frozen in terror, her legs refusing to carry her to safety. The year was 1878, and Silver Creek, Colorado, was a town caught between its rough mining past and the promise of civilization. For Beatrice, newly arrived from Boston just 3 days prior, the Wild West had already proven more dangerous than she had anticipated. Just as the stagecoach seemed mere seconds from collision, strong arms swept around her waist, lifting her clear off the ground. In one fluid motion, she found herself carried to safety, cradled against a broad chest that smelled of leather, pine, and the faintest hint of tobacco. "You all right, miss?" The voice was deep and concerned, belonging to a man with warm hazel eyes who held her steady even after setting her down on the boardwalk. Beatrice blinked back tears, her heart hammering wildly in her chest as she looked up at her rescuer. He stood tall, his face partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson hat, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with a day's worth of stubble. Yes, thank you," she managed, her voice unsteady. "I don't know what happened. Someone pushed me." The cowboy's expression darkened as he glanced back toward the crowded street. Who would do such a thing? He scanned the faces, but the perpetrator had already disappeared into the sea of people. Beatrice's legs trembled beneath her, threatening to give way. She'd come to Silver Creek with such hope, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher position. After years of caring for her ailing parents until their passing, she'd finally gathered the courage to start anew. Now, on her way to meet with the town council, this happened. "My name's Matthew Xavier," the cowboy said, still keeping a steadying hand on her elbow. "Most folks just call me Matt." "Beatrice Vance," she replied, attempting to smooth down her rumpled dress. "I'm the new schoolteacher, or at least I hope to be after my meeting with the town council." She glanced anxiously at the town hall down the street, then at the mud staining her once pristine dress. Matthew followed her gaze. "You can't go to your meeting like this, Miss Vance. Let me walk you somewhere you can clean up." Beatrice hesitated, years of proper Boston upbringing warning against accepting help from a strange man. But there was something trustworthy in Matthew's eyes, and her alternatives were few. "I'm staying at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house," she said. "It's not far, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," Matthew insisted, offering his arm. "These streets can be dangerous for newcomers. I'd feel better seeing you safely there." Beatrice took his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt sleeve. As they began walking, she became acutely aware of the glances they received a disheveled woman accompanied by a cowboy who clearly belonged on the range rather than escorting ladies through town. "Have you been in Silver Creek long, Mr. Xavier?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the stares. "Born and raised just outside town," he replied. "My father started the X-Bar Ranch when this was just a trading post. Now I run it with my brother." "A rancher," Beatrice said, unable to hide her interest. In Boston, she'd read countless dime novels about the West, though she suspected the reality was far different from those romantic tales. Matthew chuckled. "Don't sound so impressed. It's mostly hard work, dust, and arguing with cattle." They turned onto a quieter side street, and Beatrice felt herself relaxing slightly. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Xavier. I haven't been in town long enough to make many friends." "When did you arrive?" he asked. "Just 3 days ago on the stagecoach from Denver." "Everything's been such a whirlwind since then, finding lodging, preparing for my interview." She paused, thinking about the incident. "I can't imagine who would want to push me into traffic. I hardly know anyone here." Matthew's expression grew serious. "Unfortunately, not everyone in Silver Creek is welcoming to newcomers, especially those bringing education and Eastern ideas." Before Beatrice could question him further, they reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a tidy two-story building with a small garden out front. The white paint was peeling in places, but the porch was swept clean and curtains hung neatly in the windows. "This is me," Beatrice said, reluctantly withdrawing her arm from his. "Thank you again, Mr. Xavier. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Matthew removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I'm just glad I was passing by. Will you be all right from here? Do you need me to explain to Mrs. Holloway what happened?" "I can manage," Beatrice said, though part of her wished he would stay longer. There was something comforting about his presence in this strange new town. "Then I wish you luck with your meeting, Miss Vance. I hope the town council has the good sense to hire you." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps I'll see you around town." Beatrice felt a smile forming despite the ordeal she'd just experienced. "I'd like that, Mr. Xavier." He placed his hat back on his head with a slight nod. "Until then." As Beatrice watched him walk away, she couldn't help but think that perhaps Silver Creek held more promise than she'd initially thought, despite the dangerous welcome she'd received. Mrs. Holloway was a kind, bustling woman in her 50s who exclaimed in horror when Beatrice explained what had happened. Within minutes, Beatrice found herself in a steaming bath, scrubbing away the dirt and trying to calm her nerves before her meeting. As she soaked, she found her thoughts drifting to Matthew Xavier and his timely rescue. There was something about those hazel eyes that stayed with her, something solid and reassuring in a town that suddenly seemed full of unseen dangers. An hour later, dressed in her second-best dress, a modest gray affair with a high collar that made her feel properly professional, Beatrice made her way to the town hall. This time, she kept a wary eye on her surroundings, startling at every sudden movement. The town council consisted of 5 men who regarded her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism, as she outlined her educational philosophy and experience teaching at a small school in Boston. At 23, she knew she looked young for the position, but she spoke with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. "Miss Vance," said Mr. Hargrove, the bank owner who served as head of the council, "while your credentials are impressive, I must ask why Silver Creek? A refined lady such as yourself could surely find a teaching position in a more established community." Beatrice straightened her spine. "Silver Creek is growing, Mr. Hargrove. Growing towns need good schools to attract families, and families build communities. I believe I can contribute something meaningful here." She didn't mention her parents' deaths, the emptiness of their Boston home, or her desire to escape the pity in her neighbors' eyes. Some motivations were best kept private. After 30 minutes of questioning, Mr. Hargrove smiled and extended his hand. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Vance. The position is yours should you want it." Relief washed over her. "I do, Mr. Hargrove, thank you." "School begins in 2 weeks," he said. "The building needs some attention, but we'll make sure it's ready. You'll have approximately 20 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age." As Beatrice left the town hall, clutching her contract, she felt a strange mix of elation and trepidation. She had achieved her goal. She was officially Silver Creek's new schoolteacher. Yet the memory of being pushed into the street cast a shadow over her victory. Who in this town already disliked her enough to wish her harm? The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks as Beatrice made her way back to the boarding house. The streets were quieter now, with most businesses closing for the day. She walked quickly, keeping to the center of the boardwalk. "Miss Vance," the voice startled her, and she whirled around, heart pounding, only to find Matthew Xavier approaching on horseback. The massive chestnut gelding he rode seemed to match its owner in both strength and dignity. "Mr. Xavier," she breathed, relief evident in her voice. He tipped his hat. "I was heading back to town for supplies and thought I might check on you. How was your meeting?" Beatrice smiled, holding up her contract. "You're looking at Silver Creek's new schoolteacher. Congratulations." Matthew's smile was genuine, lighting up his tanned face. "The children of Silver Creek are fortunate indeed. Thank you. It's a relief to have it settled." She glanced down the darkening street. I should get back to Mrs. Holloway's before nightfall. Matthew dismounted in one fluid motion. Allow me to walk you. Dusk can bring out troublemakers. You don't have to, I insist, he said firmly, leading his horse by the reins. Besides, I'd like to hear more about your plans for the school. As they walked, Beatrice found herself speaking more freely than she had in months. She told him about her ideas for the curriculum, her hope to start a small library, and her belief that education was the foundation of a community's future. Matthew listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed a thoughtful mind behind his rugged exterior. He told her about his own education, a combination of a one-room schoolhouse and practical lessons from his father on the ranch. My brother Michael and I took over the ranch when Pa passed 5 years ago, he explained. It's not always easy, but it's a good life, honest work. It sounds wonderful, Beatrice said sincerely. Very different from Boston. I imagine so, Matthew chuckled, though I can't say I've ever been east of the Mississippi myself. They reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house too quickly for Beatrice's liking. She hesitated on the porch steps, reluctant to end their conversation. Thank you again for seeing me safely home, Mr. Xavier. Matt, he corrected gently. If you're going to be part of our community, Miss Vance, you might as well use my given name. Beatrice, she offered in return. Or B, as my friends called me back home. B, he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. It suits you. An awkward moment of silence followed, neither quite ready to say goodbye. The school building, Matthew finally said. Have you seen it yet? Beatrice shook her head. Mr. Hargrove mentioned it needs some attention before classes begin. I could show you tomorrow if you'd like. I know Silver Creek well. Her heart quickened at the offer. I would appreciate that very much. Matt. His name felt intimate on her lips, despite its simplicity. I'll come by around 10 if that suits you, he said, mounting his horse with practiced ease. 10 is perfect, Beatrice replied, unable to suppress her smile. As she watched him ride away, disappearing into the gathering dusk, Beatrice acknowledged the flutter of excitement in her chest. It had been a day of extremes, from terror in the street to the promise of a new career. And now, perhaps, a new friendship. That night, Beatrice wrote in her journal about the day's events, dwelling perhaps longer than necessary on her description of Matthew Xavier, the cowboy who had saved her life and then so gallantly seen her home. Twice. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the promise of autumn. Beatrice took extra care with her appearance, choosing a forest green dress that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She pinned her chestnut hair in a simpler style than her usual elaborate Boston coiffure, acknowledging the practicality required for life in the West. Mrs. Holloway raised an eyebrow at Beatrice's attentions to her appearance, but said nothing beyond. That Matthew Xavier comes from good stock. His father was one of the first settlers here, and those boys have built the X-Bar into one of the finest cattle operations in the county. Precisely at 10, there was a knock at the door. Matthew stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean blue shirt under his leather vest. His smile when he saw Beatrice made her cheeks warm. "Good morning, B," he said, the nickname already feeling natural between them. "Ready to see your school?" "More than ready," she replied, taking the arm he offered. As they walked through town, Matthew pointed out various businesses and introduced her to people they passed. Beatrice noticed the respect with which townspeople greeted him, though some looked curiously at her on his arm. "The school's just at the edge of town," Matthew explained as they turned onto a quieter street. "It was built about 10 years ago when Silver Creek started growing beyond just a mining camp. The schoolhouse came into view, a simple wooden building with a small bell tower atop the roof. It looked weathered but solid, with several windows along each side and a wide front porch. Beatrice felt a surge of excitement at the sight of it. "It's perfect," she breathed. Matthew laughed. "You haven't seen inside yet." He produced a key from his pocket. "Mr. Hargrove asked if I'd show you around. The council's been meaning to find someone to make repairs before the term starts." The interior was a single large room with rows of battered desks facing a teacher's desk and blackboard. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through windows that needed washing. The floor had been swept, but water stains on the ceiling suggested leaks in the roof. Rather than dismay, Beatrice felt a surge of determination. "It has good bones," she declared, running a hand along one of the desks. "With some work, this will be a fine school." Matthew watched her with admiration. Most Eastern ladies would be running back to the stagecoach by now. "I'm not most Eastern ladies," Beatrice replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "No," he agreed softly, "you certainly are not." They spent the next hour discussing what repairs were needed: a new coat of paint inside and out, repairs to the roof, replacement of some broken window panes, and refinishing of the desks. To Beatrice's surprise, Matthew offered to help with much of the work himself. "The ranch keeps me busy, but my brother can manage for a few days. Education matters, and Silver Creek hasn't always given the school the attention it deserves." "Why is that?" Beatrice asked, curious. Matthew's expression grew thoughtful. "This town was built on silver mining, and for a long time, most folks were just passing through, looking to strike it rich. Children were put to work in the mines as soon as they were old enough to hold a shovel." He gestured to the surrounding area. "Now the mines are playing out and ranching's becoming the backbone of the economy. Families are settling permanently, thinking about futures beyond the next silver strike. And futures require education," Beatrice finished. "Exactly," Matthew smiled approvingly. "Though not everyone sees it that way yet. Some of the old-timers still think book learning is a waste of time, especially for girls." Beatrice's brow furrowed. "Could that be why someone pushed me yesterday? Opposition to education," Matthew's expression darkened. "It's possible. Or it could be someone who wanted the teaching position for a friend or relative. Small towns can breed small minds sometimes." "Well," Beatrice said, lifting her chin, "they'll have to do more than push me into the street to drive me away from my purpose." Matthew's laugh was warm and genuine. "I believe you, Miss Vance, and I pity anyone who tries to stand in your way." They left the schoolhouse and walked toward the center of town, continuing to discuss plans for the repairs. When they reached the general store, Matthew hesitated. "Would you join me for lunch at the hotel restaurant?" "It's the best food in town, aside from Mrs. Holloway's cooking." The invitation sent a thrill through Beatrice. "I'd be delighted." The Silver Creek Hotel restaurant was the most refined establishment in town, with white tablecloths and a menu that aspired to Eastern standards. As Matthew held her chair, Beatrice was acutely aware of the glances they received from other diners. "Is it unusual for you to dine with a lady?" she asked quietly after they ordered. Matthew's mouth quirked. "It's unusual for me to dine in town at all. Most days I eat whatever our ranch cook throws together." His eyes held hers. "But some occasions merit special treatment." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. Over lunch, their conversation deepened. Matthew told her about losing his mother to influenza when he was 14, and how his father had raised him and his brother alone until passing away from a heart ailment 5 years ago. Beatrice shared her own loss, both parents within a year of each other, leaving her alone in the world at 22. "Is that why you came west?" Matthew asked gently. Beatrice nodded. "Boston held too many memories. I needed somewhere new, somewhere I could be useful." "And are you finding what you sought in Silver Creek?" She thought about the kindness of Mrs. Holloway, the opportunity the town council had given her, and the man sitting across from her who had already shown her more consideration than any gentleman in Boston. "I believe I am," she said softly. Their meal concluded too quickly for Beatrice's liking. As they stepped back onto the street, Matthew mentioned he needed to purchase supplies before returning to the ranch. "Will I see you again soon?" Beatrice asked, trying to sound casual. "Count on it," Matthew replied with a smile that made her heart skip. "I'll be back in 2 days to start work on the schoolhouse, and the harvest dance is next Saturday. The whole county attends. Perhaps you'd consider accompanying me." A public dance, a declaration of interest that the entire community would witness. Beatrice knew what such an invitation would mean in Boston society, but was it the same here? "I'd be honored," she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her excitement. Matthew's smile broadened. Until then, be. The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. True to his word, Matthew returned to work on the schoolhouse, bringing lumber, paint, and tools. Beatrice worked alongside him, ignoring his initial protests that painting and repairs weren't ladies' work. "If I can manage a household of invalid parents for 3 years, Mr. Xavier, I can certainly handle a paintbrush," she had declared, rolling up her sleeves and donning an old apron. Matthew had conceded with a laugh, and they had fallen into an easy partnership, working from morning until dusk with breaks only for the lunches Beatrice packed. Each day revealed new facets of Matthew's character: his patience when a repair proved difficult, his meticulous attention to detail, his wry humor that often caught her by surprise. By Friday, the transformation was remarkable. Fresh white paint brightened the exterior, while the interior walls glowed a soft cream color. The desks had been sanded and revarnished, the windows cleaned until they sparkled, and the blackboard resurfaced. Matthew had even repaired the bell rope in the small tower, allowing Beatrice to ring it for the first time. "It's beautiful," she said, turning slowly to take in their work. "I can hardly believe it's the same building." "Just needed some care," Matthew replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Like most things worth having." His gaze lingered on her face, and Beatrice felt a familiar warmth spreading through her chest. Over the past days, something had shifted between them, touches lingering longer than necessary. Glances held a moment too long, conversations that meandered into personal territories neither had intended to explore. "Tomorrow's the dance," Matthew said quietly, breaking the spell between them. "I'll come for you at 7. "I'll be ready," Beatrice promised. That evening, back at Mrs. Holloway's, Beatrice fretted over her limited wardrobe. Her best dress, the blue one she'd worn upon arrival, had been cleaned, but it still bore faint stains from her fall in the street. Mrs. Holloway, sensing her distress, knocked on her door with a large box in her arms. "My daughter's about your size," the older woman explained. "She left this when she married and moved to Denver last year, never had occasion to wear it here, but perhaps you might make use of it." Inside the box lay a gown of deep burgundy silk with delicate lace trim, far finer than anything Beatrice had brought with her and more fashionable than she would have expected to find in Silver Creek. "Mrs. Holloway, I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," the landlady interrupted firmly. "It's gathering dust in my trunk, and Sarah would be pleased to know it was being worn by someone who appreciates it. Besides," she added with a knowing smile, "Matthew Xavier doesn't often escort ladies to dances. The occasion deserves something special." The next evening, as Beatrice descended the stairs in the burgundy gown, her hair arranged in soft curls with a few small burgundy flowers tucked among the pins, she was rewarded by Matthew's stunned expression. He stood in the parlor, hat in hand, wearing a black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his usually unruly hair tamed with pomade. "You look." He began, then shook his head, apparently at a loss for words. "So do you," Beatrice replied, understanding exactly what he meant. The harvest dance was held in the largest building in Silver Creek, a community hall that had been decorated with autumn leaves, dried cornstalks, and dozens of lanterns. A 5-piece band played at one end, while tables laden with food and drink lined the other. Nearly everyone in town and many from the surrounding ranches had turned out, creating a lively, crowded atmosphere. As they entered, Beatrice on Matthew's arm, she felt the weight of curious stares. Clearly, Matthew's presence with a woman, especially the new schoolteacher, was causing a stir. "Everyone's looking at us," she whispered. "Let them look," he replied simply. "Would you care to dance?" The band was playing a waltz, and Matthew led her onto the floor with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, guiding her through the turns with confidence. "You dance very well for a cowboy," Beatrice observed, smiling up at him. "My mother insisted Michael and I learn," he explained. "Said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn colt." His expression softened at the memory. "She would have liked you, I think." "I wish I could have met her," Beatrice replied sincerely, As the evening progressed, Beatrice was introduced to dozens of people: ranchers, shopkeepers, farmers, and their families. Some were openly curious about the Eastern schoolteacher, while others seemed reserved, even suspicious. But Matthew's obvious regard for her seemed to grant her a measure of acceptance she might not otherwise have received. During a break between dances, while Matthew fetched them punch, Beatrice found herself approached by a severe-looking woman in a plain gray dress. "Miss Vance, I presume," the woman said, her tone clipped. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Winters. My husband serves on the town council." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Winters," Beatrice replied politely. "I'll be direct, Miss Vance. I find your familiarity with Mr. Xavier inappropriate for someone in your position. School teachers must maintain irreproachable reputations." Beatrice felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I assure you, Mrs. Winters, my conduct has been entirely proper. Mr. Xavier has been kind enough to help repair the schoolhouse and introduce me to the community." "Indeed," Mrs. Winters's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Such generosity from a bachelor rancher toward a young, unmarried woman naturally invites speculation. The children of Silver Creek deserve a teacher above reproach." Before Beatrice could formulate a response that wouldn't jeopardize her new position, Matthew returned, 2 cups of punch in hand. His expression darkened slightly at the sight of Mrs. Winters. "Eleanor," he greeted her with cool politeness, "I see you've met our new schoolteacher." "Yes," Mrs. Winters replied. "I was just expressing my concern about certain appearances." Matthew's jaw tightened. "If you're suggesting there's anything improper about Miss Vance's conduct, I'd advise you to reconsider. She has shown nothing but dedication to her new position, working tirelessly to prepare the schoolhouse that your husband and the other council members have neglected for years." Mrs. Winters's lips pressed into a thin line. "I merely think it's important for newcomers to understand our community's expectations, Matthew, particularly those entrusted with our children's education." With a curt nod, she walked away. "I apologize for Eleanor," Matthew said quietly, handing Beatrice her punch. "Her husband's on the council because his family has money, not because anyone particularly likes either of them." "Do you think she could cause trouble for me?" Beatrice asked, worried. "I've only just secured this position." Matthew shook his head. "The council votes on school matters, and Bernard Winters is just one vote. Besides, once the parents see the improvements to the schoolhouse and experience your teaching, they'll stand behind you." His confidence reassured her, but Mrs. Winters's words had cast a shadow over the evening. As they continued to dance, Beatrice noticed the woman speaking to others, occasionally glancing in their direction. "Perhaps we should be more circumspect," Beatrice suggested reluctantly. "I don't want to give anyone reason to question my suitability as a teacher." Matthew's expression grew serious. "B, do you enjoy my company?" "Very much," she admitted. "And I yours. I won't pretend otherwise to satisfy Eleanor Winters's narrow view of propriety." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "But if you prefer to distance yourself from me for the sake of your position, I'll understand." The thought of pulling away from the connection they'd formed over the past week left Beatrice with an ache in her chest. "No," she said firmly. "Mrs. Winters will have to find something else to gossip about." Matthew's smile returned, warming his eyes. "Good, because I have no intention of staying away from you, Beatrice Vance." As the evening drew to a close, Matthew suggested they step outside for some air. The night was cool, the sky ablaze with stars that seemed impossibly bright and close compared to Boston's skies. "I've never seen so many stars," Beatrice breathed, gazing upward. "One of the benefits of the West," Matthew replied, standing close beside her. "Everything's bigger out here: the sky, the land, the possibilities." She turned to find him watching her rather than the stars, his expression making her heart race. "B," he said softly, "I know we've only known each other a week, but I feel as though..." He was interrupted by the hall doors bursting open as several couples spilled out, laughing and talking loudly. The moment broken, Matthew offered his arm. "May I walk you home?" The short walk to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house passed in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. On the porch, Beatrice turned to thank him for the evening. I had a wonderful time, she said sincerely, as did I. Matthew hesitated, then reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "B, would you allow me to call on you properly? Sunday after church, perhaps." The formal request, the Western equivalent of a Boston gentleman asking permission to court a lady, sent a thrill through her. "I would like that very much," she replied. Matthew's smile was radiant in the moonlight. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until Sunday, then," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "Until Sunday," she echoed, reluctant to reclaim her hand. With a final smile, Matthew stepped back, placed his hat on his head, and descended the porch steps. Beatrice watched him until he disappeared into the darkness, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. Inside, Mrs. Holloway was waiting up, pretending to mend a pillowcase but clearly eager for details. "Had a nice evening, did you?" the landlady asked, trying to sound casual. "Lovely," Beatrice replied, unable to suppress her smile. "And Mr. Xavier will be calling on Sunday after church, Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "He's a good man, that Matthew Xavier. His father raised those boys right." She set aside her mending. "But you should know, dear, not everyone will approve. Some folks think a schoolteacher should remain unmarried and devoted solely to her students. Like Mrs. Winters." Beatrice guessed. "Eleanor Winters has opinions on everything and everyone," Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "Don't you fret about her, but do be prepared for some resistance." Beatrice nodded, sobered by the reminder that her personal happiness might conflict with her professional standing. Yet as she prepared for bed, her thoughts kept returning to Matthew's gentle kiss on her hand and the promise of Sunday. The next day was Sunday, and Beatrice attended the small white church in the center of town. She noticed Matthew sitting with a man who resembled him, presumably his brother Michael, several pews ahead. When the service ended, he caught her eye and smiled, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. As Beatrice exited the church, she found herself approached by a slender woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as Martha Jenkins, the wife of the general store owner. "I wanted to welcome you properly to Silver Creek," Martha said warmly, "and to invite you to join our Ladies' Aid Society. We meet on Wednesday afternoons to sew for the needy and discuss community improvements." "I'd be delighted," Beatrice replied, grateful for the friendly overture. "Wonderful. And don't worry about Eleanor Winters. She huffs and puffs, but most of us make our own judgments about people." Martha lowered her voice. "Between us, I think it's marvelous that Matthew Xavier is finally showing interest in a woman. That ranch of his needs a woman's touch, and those boys need wives before they work themselves into early graves like their father did." Before Beatrice could formulate a response to this frank assessment, Martha patted her arm and moved on, leaving Beatrice slightly flustered but amused. True to his word, Matthew appeared at Mrs. Holloway's that afternoon, dressed in clean Sunday clothes, his hat in his hands. Mrs. Holloway invited him in for coffee with a knowing smile that made Beatrice blush. They sat in the parlor, maintaining a proper distance under Mrs. Holloway's occasional supervision, but their conversation flowed easily. Matthew spoke about his ranch, the challenges of the upcoming winter, his plans to expand their herd in the spring, the new breeding stock he'd acquired from Texas. "You should visit the X-Bar sometime," he suggested. "It's only 5 miles outside town. The autumn colors are at their peak right now." "I'd like that," Beatrice replied, imagining wide open spaces and golden leaves against blue skies. "Perhaps next Saturday, if the weather holds, I could bring a wagon and take you for a proper tour." The invitation to visit his home, to spend hours in his company away from town, represented another step forward in their developing relationship. Beatrice knew what such a visit would mean in the eyes of the community. "I would enjoy that very much," she said, her decision made. Matthew's smile told her he understood the significance of her acceptance. When he left that evening, after a supper Mrs. Holloway insisted he stay for, Beatrice felt as though something fundamental had shifted. What had begun with a rescue in the street was blossoming into something deeper. something with the potential to change the course of her life in ways she had never anticipated when boarding the stagecoach to Silver Creek. The following week brought the start of school, and Beatrice found herself immersed in the challenges of teaching 20 children of varying ages and abilities. Some, like 12-year-old Emma Jenkins, were eager students who had clearly been well educated at home. Others, particularly the older boys, seemed resistant to authority and skeptical of the value of education. 16-year-old James Winters, Mrs. Winters's son, was especially challenging, questioning Beatrice's knowledge and authority at every opportunity. It was clear the boy had absorbed his mother's prejudice against the new teacher. By Friday afternoon, Beatrice was exhausted but satisfied with her first week. Most of the children were responding well to her teaching methods, and even James had shown grudging interest in the history lesson about the Revolutionary War. As she was locking up the schoolhouse, she was startled by a voice behind her. "How's our schoolmarm settling in?" Beatrice turned to find Bernard Winters, James's father and Mrs. Winters's husband, standing uncomfortably close. He was a heavy-set man with small eyes and a florid complexion that suggested an overindulgence in whiskey. "Quite well, thank you, Mr. Winters," Beatrice replied politely, taking a step back. "Your son James is very bright." "Is he now?" Winters's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My wife doesn't think much of your teaching methods. Too progressive, she says." "I try to balance traditional approaches with newer techniques," Beatrice explained, increasingly uneasy with his proximity. "Each child learns differently. My wife also doesn't approve of your friendship with Xavier," Winters continued, ignoring her explanation. "Says it sets a poor example." "I told her I'd have a word with you about it." "My personal life is my own concern, Mr. Winters," Beatrice said firmly, clutching her books tighter to her chest. "As long as I fulfill my duties as a teacher appropriately." Winters moved closer, forcing Beatrice to step back until she was against the schoolhouse door. "Thing is, Miss Vance, the town council can vote to terminate your contract if we feel you're not meeting community standards." The implied threat was clear, and Beatrice felt a surge of anger replacing her unease. "Are you threatening my position because I've accepted Mr. Xavier's company, Mr. Winters?" "Just offering friendly advice," he replied, his breath sour with alcohol. "Pretty lady like you shouldn't limit her." Acquaintances so quickly in a new town. Understanding dawned, leaving Beatrice cold despite the warm afternoon. Winters wasn't just threatening her job, he was suggesting she should welcome his attentions instead of Matthew's. "Mr. Winters, I believe you've made your point," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have papers to grade." She attempted to move past him, but Winters placed a meaty hand on the door beside her head, blocking her path. "No need to rush off," he said, his voice dropping lower. "We could get better acquainted. My wife's visiting her sister in Denver this weekend. No one would know." "I would know," came a hard voice from behind them. Winters spun around to find Matthew Xavier standing a few feet away, his expression thunderous. Beatrice had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. "Xavier," Winters acknowledged, his tone sullen, "this is a private conversation." "Doesn't look private to me," Matthew replied evenly. "Looks like you're bothering Miss Vance, who clearly wants to leave." Winters's face darkened. "This isn't your concern. School matters are council business." "Harassing a lady is everyone's concern," Matthew countered, stepping closer. "And I doubt the rest of the council would approve of your methods." For a tense moment, Beatrice feared the men might come to blows. Then Winters seemed to deflate, stepping away from the door with a forced laugh. "Just having a friendly chat with our new teacher," he said, straightening his vest. "No harm done." "Mr. Winters was just leaving," Beatrice said firmly, finding her voice. With a final glare at Matthew, Winters stalked away, muttering under his breath. Once he was out of earshot, Matthew turned to Beatrice, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No, just frightened me a little," she admitted, still shaking slightly. "How did you happen to be here?" "I came to confirm our plans for tomorrow," Matthew explained. "I'm glad I arrived when I did." "As am I," Beatrice's voice caught. The reality of what might have happened, both Winters's implied threats to her position and his unwanted advances, was sinking in. Matthew's expression softened. "May I walk you home, please?" As they walked, Beatrice explained what had transpired before Matthew's arrival, including Winters's thinly veiled threats regarding her job. "He can't dismiss you on his own," Matthew assured her. "It would take a majority vote of the council, and Hargrove thinks too highly of you to allow that without serious cause. But if Mrs. Winters continues to spread rumors about my character, and if her husband supports those claims," Beatrice worried aloud. "Then we'll face that together," Matthew said firmly. "I won't let them drive you away, Bea, not unless that's what you want." His steadfast support touched her deeply. "It isn't what I want at all," she admitted. "I've come to care for Silver Creek and its people." She glanced up at him, meaning clear in her eyes. Matthew's gaze held hers, intense and warm. "Good, because Silver Creek and its people have come to care for you too." They had reached Mrs. Holloway's, and Beatrice found herself reluctant to go inside to end this moment of connection. "Will you still come tomorrow?" she asked. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Matthew promised. "I'll be here at 10 with the wagon." That night, Beatrice lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, her mind replaying the day's events. Winters's threats troubled her, but it was Matthew's unwavering support that occupied most of her thoughts. In just 2 weeks, he had become central to her life in Silver Creek, her defender, her friend, and perhaps something more. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for a drive in the country. Beatrice chose a practical outfit, a rust-colored skirt and cream shirtwaist with a matching jacket, and pinned her hair in a simpler style than usual, anticipating the wind on the open road. Matthew arrived precisely at 10, driving a well-maintained wagon pulled by 2 matching bay horses. He jumped down to help her up to the seat, his hands strong and warm at her waist. "You look lovely," he said, his eyes appreciative. "Thank you," Beatrice replied, settling her skirts. "I'm looking forward to seeing your ranch." The drive out of town was pleasant, the road following a creek through golden aspen groves and pine forests. Matthew pointed out landmarks and told stories about growing up in the area, his first hunting trip with his father, the time he and Michael had gotten lost trying to track a mountain lion, the secret fishing spot they'd discovered as boys. "You love it here," Beatrice observed, watching his animated expressions as he spoke. "I do," he admitted. "I've never wanted to be anywhere else. The X-Bar is in my blood." As they crested a hill, the valley opened before them, revealing the X-Bar Ranch in all its autumn glory. A large 2-story house of hewn logs stood proudly amid several outbuildings and corrals. Beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed, and behind it all rose mountains still capped with snow despite the season. "Matthew, it's beautiful," Beatrice breathed, taking in the scene. He smiled, pleased by her reaction. "Wait until you see it up close." As they approached the main house, several ranch hands called greetings to Matthew, eyeing Beatrice with undisguised curiosity. A tall man who resembled Matthew emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's Michael," Matthew explained, waving to his brother. Michael approached as Matthew helped Beatrice down from the wagon. The family resemblance was striking, though Michael was slightly taller and leaner, with darker hair and a more serious expression. "So you're the schoolteacher who's had my brother volunteering for carpentry work," Michael said by way of greeting, though his eyes were kind. "He's been useless around here, talking about nothing but paint colors and bell ropes." "Michael," Matthew warned, but Beatrice laughed. "I'm grateful for his help," she said. "The schoolhouse needed quite a bit of attention, so I heard." Michael's expression grew more serious. "I also heard about your run-in with Winters yesterday. Word travels fast." Beatrice glanced at Matthew, who shrugged apologetically. "I had to explain to Michael why I was heading to town when I should have been fixing the north pasture fence." "Winters is a snake," Michael said bluntly. "Always has been. But he won't risk crossing the whole town, and most folks around here respect a teacher more than a councilman who's deep in debt to half the merchants in Silver Creek." His straightforward support was reassuring, and Beatrice found herself warming to Matthew's brother despite his gruff manner. Matthew gave her a tour of the ranch house, a surprisingly comfortable home with solid furniture and touches of refinement that spoke of a woman's influence long ago. A piano stood in one corner of the parlor, sheet music still open on the stand. "My mother's," Matthew explained, following her gaze. "Neither Michael nor I had the patience to learn, but she loved to play in the evenings." "It's a lovely home," Beatrice said sincerely. "It needs a woman's touch," Matthew replied, his eyes meeting hers. "It's been too long with just Michael and me rattling around in it." The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. After the house tour, Matthew showed her the rest of the ranch, the barns, the bunkhouse where the hands lived, the corrals where several beautiful horses watched them curiously. He introduced her to Cookie, the grizzled old ranch cook who grudgingly offered them coffee and fresh baked biscuits in the cookhouse. By mid-afternoon, they had worked up an appetite, and Matthew suggested a picnic by the creek that gave the town its name. He had prepared a basket, which had been waiting in the wagon: cold chicken, bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of wine carefully wrapped in a cloth. "You thought of everything," Beatrice said, touched by his thoughtfulness. They spread a blanket under a golden aspen tree beside the creek, the sound of water over rocks providing a soothing backdrop to their meal. The autumn sun was warm despite the cool air, and Beatrice found herself relaxing completely for the first time since arriving in Silver Creek. "Thank you for today," she said, accepting the cup of wine Matthew offered. "It's been wonderful to see where you live, to understand what matters to you." "I'm glad you came," he replied, settling beside her on the blanket, close but not inappropriately so. "I wanted you to see this place, to know this part of me." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their wine and watching the play of light on the water. Matthew began hesitantly, "I know we've known each other only a short time, but I feel as though—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "As though what?" Beatrice prompted softly, her heart quickening. "As though I've been waiting for you without knowing it," he finished, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Since the moment I lifted you from that street, something has been growing between us, something I've never felt before." Beatrice set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "I feel it too," she admitted. "It's unexpected and perhaps unwise, given how little time we've known each other, but I can't deny it." Matthew moved closer, his hand finding hers on the blanket. "I don't want to rush you or to create difficulties with your position in town. But I need you to know that my intentions are serious, B. When I look at you, I see possibilities I never considered before." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. In Boston, courtships followed strict protocols, unfolding over months or years. But here in the West, life moved at a different pace. People recognized what was valuable and held on to it, knowing how quickly fortunes could change. "Matthew," she said, meeting his gaze steadily, "I came west seeking a new beginning, never imagining I would find someone like you. Whatever difficulties might come, I believe what's growing between us is worth facing them." His smile was radiant as he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. Then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned closer. Their first kiss was gentle, a whisper of a touch that nonetheless set Beatrice's heart racing. When Matthew drew back, the question in his eyes was answered by Beatrice's smile, and he kissed her again, more confidently this time. It was Beatrice who finally pulled away, breathless and flushed. "We should probably return to town before we give Mrs. Holloway reason to worry," she said, though she made no move to rise. Matthew nodded reluctantly. "You're right, though I'd happily stay here with you until the stars come out." As they packed up the remains of their picnic, a companionable silence fell between them, both processing the shift in their relationship. The drive back to town passed quickly, with Matthew occasionally reaching over to take Beatrice's hand, as if reassuring himself that what had passed between them was real. At Mrs. Holloway's gate, Matthew helped Beatrice down from the wagon, holding her a moment longer than necessary. "May I call on you tomorrow after church?" he asked. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she replied with a smile. This time their parting kiss was brief but full of promise, a pledge of more to come, of a future unfolding before them like the open road they'd traveled together. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant pattern. Matthew called on Beatrice every Sunday after church, sometimes taking her for drives in the countryside, other times simply sitting with her in Mrs. Holloway's parlor. During the week, he often appeared at the schoolhouse after classes ended, walking Beatrice home and helping carry her books and papers. Their growing attachment did not go unnoticed in Silver Creek. Some, like Martha Jenkins and her friends, viewed the romance with approval and even a touch of matchmaking pride. Others, particularly the Winters faction, continued to mutter about propriety and the role of a schoolteacher. Beatrice found unexpected allies among the parents of her students, who appreciated her dedication to their children's education. Emma Jenkins's mother defended her fiercely at a church social when Mrs. Winters made a snide comment about Eastern women with loose morals. "Beatrice Vance has done more for my Emma's education in 1 month than the last teacher did in a year," Martha had declared loudly enough for all to hear. "And if Matthew Xavier has finally found a woman worthy of him, we should all be celebrating instead of gossiping like fishwives." The incident, which Beatrice heard about secondhand, warmed her heart and strengthened her resolve to prove herself worthy of both the community's trust and Matthew's affection. October gave way to November, bringing colder weather and preparations for winter. Matthew was increasingly busy at the ranch, ensuring the cattle had enough feed stored and the buildings were ready for snow. His visits to town became less frequent, though no less meaningful when they occurred. On the first Sunday in November after church, Matthew suggested they take advantage of the unseasonably warm day for one last picnic before winter set in properly. They rode in his wagon to a sheltered spot by the creek, now nearly bare of leaves but still beautiful in its stark autumn glory. After they had eaten, Matthew grew uncharacteristically quiet, fidgeting with his hat as they sat side by side on the blanket. "Is something troubling you?" Beatrice asked, concerned by his unusual behavior. Matthew took a deep breath, then turned to face her directly. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. You've brought something to my world that I didn't even know was missing." Her heart quickened at the intensity in his eyes. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "Winter's coming," he continued, "and the ranch will keep me busy. I hate the thought of not seeing you every day." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon by Eastern standards, but out here, when you find something precious, you don't wait until it might slip away." Beatrice's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the autumn sunlight. "Beatrice Vance, I love you. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes, but they were tears of joy. In just 2 months, this man had become essential to her happiness, to her vision of the future. The thought of joining her life to his, of making a home with him on the beautiful ranch he loved so deeply, filled her with certainty. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Matthew, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally broke apart, Matthew pressed his forehead to hers, his voice rough with emotion. "I was so afraid you might think it too soon." "Life is different here," Beatrice replied, understanding it fully now. "In Boston, we might have danced around each other for years, bound by convention, but here we recognize what matters and hold on to it." She looked down at the ring on her finger, then back up at his beloved face. "And you, Matthew Xavier, matter more than anything." They stayed by the creek until the sun began to sink, making plans for their future. They would marry in the spring, when travel was easier for Beatrice's few remaining relatives in Boston to attend. She would continue teaching until the end of the school year, then move to the X-Bar permanently. "Michael will probably move into the foreman's cabin," Matthew mused. "He's been talking about wanting his own space for years." "Will he mind?" Beatrice asked, suddenly concerned about displacing Matthew's brother. Mind, he'll be relieved. He's been telling me to find a wife since Pa died. Says I'm too particular about the house for a bachelor. Matthew grinned. Wait until he finds out you're even more particular than I am. As they drove back to town, the future stretching before them like the road ahead, Beatrice reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. If she hadn't been pushed into the street that September day, if Matthew hadn't happened to be passing by at exactly the right moment, their paths might never have crossed. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best," she replied. "If I hadn't been pushed into the street that day, you might never have noticed me." Matthew's expression darkened momentarily. "I've been meaning to tell you I think I know who pushed you." Surprised, Beatrice turned to face him. "Who?" James Winters told one of the ranch hand's sons that his father paid a drifter to scare off the eastern schoolmarm before she could fill the children's heads with nonsense. The boy told his father, who told me last week. Beatrice gasped. "Bernard Winters arranged for me to be pushed. I could have been killed." "I doubt he intended it to go that far," Matthew said grimly. "But he's been against bringing in a new teacher from the start, wanted his wife's cousin from Denver to get the position." "That explains his hostility," Beatrice murmured, "and Mrs. Winters's as well." "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Matthew asked. "We could take this to Sheriff Cooper, but it would be the ranch hand's son's word against Winters, and the boy might deny it under pressure." Beatrice considered the options. A public accusation would divide the town, potentially undermining her position and creating tension just as she and Matthew were planning their future together. Yet the thought of Winters escaping consequences for his actions rankled. "Perhaps there's another way," she said slowly. "If Mr. Hargrove and the other council members knew about this, they might be less inclined to support Winters in future matters regarding the school." Matthew nodded approvingly. "Political pressure rather than legal action." "I like how you think, Miss Vance. Soon to be Mrs. Xavier," she reminded him with a smile that quickly faded, "though I suppose that will mean finding a new teacher for Silver Creek." "Not necessarily," Matthew replied. "The X-Bar is only 5 miles from town. With a good horse, you could still teach if you wanted to." The thought that she wouldn't have to choose between her vocation and her love filled Beatrice with renewed happiness. "I would like that," she admitted, "at least until we start a family of our own." Matthew's expression softened at the mention of children. "Our children will have the best educated mother in the territory," he said proudly. When they reached Mrs. Holloway's, Matthew formally requested a private word with the landlady before he left. Beatrice knew he was informing her of their engagement, a courtesy to the woman who had become something of a surrogate mother to Beatrice in her time in Silver Creek. Mrs. Holloway's delighted exclamations could be heard through the closed parlor door, followed by earnest conversation. When they emerged, the older woman's eyes were damp, but she was beaming. "I knew from the moment he carried you to my door that first day," she told Beatrice, patting her cheek affectionately. "Some things are just meant to be." News of the engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. By Monday morning, Beatrice was receiving congratulations from parents dropping their children at school, and several of her female students were openly admiring her ring. Not everyone was pleased, of course. Mrs. Winters made a point of crossing the street rather than passing Beatrice on the boardwalk, and Bernard Winters filed a formal complaint with the town council regarding the impropriety of an engaged schoolteacher. The complaint backfired spectacularly when Mr. Hargrove, after a private conversation with Matthew, called a special council meeting to discuss concerns about Councilman Winters's conduct toward town employees. Though no specific accusations were made publicly, Winters emerged from the meeting pale and subdued and withdrew his complaint about Beatrice's engagement. November gave way to December, bringing the first heavy snows and preparations for Christmas. Beatrice organized a Christmas pageant at the school, enlisting Martha Jenkins and other mothers to help with costumes and refreshments. The event was a resounding success, with nearly the entire town turning out to watch the children perform the nativity story and recite poems they had memorized under Beatrice's tutelage. Matthew attended proudly, standing at the back of the crowded schoolroom and catching Beatrice's eye whenever she glanced his way. After the performance, as parents collected their children and neighbors exchanged holiday greetings, he made his way to her side. "You've done wonders with them," he said, gesturing to the children. Even James Winters remembered all his lines as Joseph. "He's actually quite bright when he applies himself," Beatrice replied, and his mother seems to have softened her position somewhat since the council meeting. "Amazing how a hint of scandal can change perspectives," Matthew observed dryly. As they stepped outside into the gently falling snow, Matthew took her hand, tucking it into the crook of his arm. "I have a Christmas gift for you," he said, "but it's at the ranch. Could you come out tomorrow?" Michael's invited some of the Hands and their families for Christmas Eve dinner, and he specifically asked if you would join us. "I'd love to," Beatrice replied, touched by the invitation. It would be her first Christmas without her parents, and the thought of spending it with her new family to be filled her with warmth despite the winter chill. The next day, Matthew arrived with the wagon, now fitted with runners for travel over snow. Mrs. Holloway sent them off with a basket of freshly baked pies for the ranch gathering, and Beatrice carried a small package containing the gift she had made for Matthew, a hand-knitted scarf in a deep blue that matched his eyes. The X-Bar Ranch was transformed by snow, the buildings outlined in white, smoke curling from chimneys against the clear blue sky. Inside the main house, a large pine tree had been set up in the parlor, decorated with strings of popcorn, paper stars, and a few cherished glass ornaments that had belonged to Matthew and Michael's mother. Michael greeted Beatrice with uncharacteristic warmth, the Christmas spirit apparently softening his usual reserve. "Welcome to the family Christmas, Beatrice," he said, taking her coat. "It's good to have a woman's touch around the place again." The evening was filled with laughter, music from a fiddle played by one of the ranch hands, and more food than Beatrice had seen since leaving Boston. The ranch families welcomed her warmly, clearly already considering her part of the X-Bar family. After dinner, as the gathering continued in the main room, Matthew drew Beatrice aside to his father's study, a cozy room lined with books and dominated by a large desk. "I wanted to give you your gift privately," he explained, looking suddenly nervous. From the desk drawer, he withdrew a long, narrow box wrapped in silver paper. Beatrice opened it carefully to find a delicate gold chain with a small pendant, a beautifully crafted miniature book that opened to reveal tiny pages. "It's beautiful," she breathed, examining the intricate craftsmanship. "Look inside," Matthew urged, squinting at the tiny pages. Beatrice could make out minuscule handwriting. On the first page was written, "To Beatrice, who brought light and learning to my life, all my love, Matthew." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at him. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Will you help me put it on?" Matthew carefully fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. The pendant nestled just below her collarbone, a tangible symbol of the connection between them. "I have something for you too," Beatrice said, retrieving her package from where she'd left it on the desk. Matthew unwrapped the scarf, his expression softening as he ran his fingers over the careful stitches. "You made this," Beatrice nodded. "Mrs. Holloway helped me with the pattern." "I know it's not as fine as your gift, but it's perfect," Matthew interrupted, wrapping the scarf around his neck. "Made by your hands, nothing could be more precious." He drew her into his arms then, his kiss conveying everything words could not: his love, his gratitude for her presence in his life, his anticipation of their future together. When they rejoined the gathering, Michael raised an eyebrow at the new accessories they both wore but said nothing, his small smile conveying his approval. The winter months passed in a pleasant rhythm of work and courtship. Beatrice continued teaching, while Matthew divided his time between ranch duties and preparations for their spring wedding. They saw each other less frequently due to the snow-covered roads, but Matthew made the journey to town whenever possible. sometimes staying overnight at the hotel to avoid traveling back to the ranch in darkness. By March, the snow was beginning to recede and wedding plans were in full swing. Beatrice had written to her aunt and uncle in Boston, her only remaining family, who promised to attend despite the long journey. Martha Jenkins and several other women had taken charge of decorating the church, while Mrs. Holloway was overseeing the wedding breakfast to be held in the hotel dining room. One Saturday in late March, as Beatrice was reviewing fabric samples for her wedding dress with Mrs. Holloway, a commotion in the street drew them to the window. A group of men on horseback was galloping into town, one of them slumped forward in his saddle, clearly injured. With a gasp of recognition, Beatrice realized the injured man was Matthew Xavier, and another rider was Matthew, his face grim as he supported his brother. Without a word to Mrs. Holloway, Beatrice ran outside, reaching the street just as the riders pulled up in front of the doctor's office. "Matthew," she called, hurrying toward them. "What happened?" Matthew looked up, his expression a mix of relief at seeing her and deep concern for his brother. "Rustlers," he explained tersely as he and another ranch hand carefully lifted Michael from his horse. "They shot Michael when we caught them driving off some of our cattle." Dr. Peterson emerged from his office, immediately taking charge of the situation. "Bring him inside," he ordered, leading the way. Beatrice followed, her heart in her throat as she saw the bloodstains spreading across Michael's shirt. Inside the doctor's examination room, they laid Michael on the table, his face pale and drawn with pain but his eyes open and alert. "It's not as bad as it looks," he insisted weakly. "Just caught me in the shoulder." Dr. Peterson cut away Michael's shirt, revealing a bullet wound high on his left shoulder. After a quick examination, he nodded. "Clean through, missed the bone. You're lucky, Xavier. With proper care, you should heal completely." The relief in Matthew's expression was palpable. He gripped his brother's good hand briefly, then stepped back to allow the doctor room to work. "The sheriff's organizing a posse," one of the ranch hands explained to Beatrice. "These rustlers have hit 3 ranches in the past month. This time we nearly caught them." "Will you go with the posse?" Beatrice asked Matthew, already knowing the answer but dreading it nonetheless. Matthew nodded grimly. "I have to. They shot my brother and stole our cattle." "I can't let that stand." Beatrice understood, but fear clutched at her heart. Cattle rustlers were desperate men, often willing to kill to escape capture. The thought of Matthew facing such danger made her blood run cold. "When do you leave?" she asked quietly. "As soon as I know Michael's in good hands," Matthew replied. "The trail gets colder by the hour." Dr. Peterson looked up from his work. "Your brother will be fine, Matthew. I'll keep him here tonight for observation, but the wound is clean and he's strong." Michael managed a weak smile. "Go get our cattle back, Matt, and put a bullet in the bastard who shot me if you get the chance." Matthew squeezed his brother's hand again, then turned to Beatrice. "Walk with me while I get supplies." Outside, as they headed toward the general store where the posse was gathering, Matthew pulled Beatrice into the shelter of an alleyway, away from curious eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This isn't how I wanted to spend today." "Don't apologize," Beatrice replied, reaching up to touch his face. "It's your duty to protect what's yours. Just come back to me safely, please." Matthew caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Nothing could keep me from returning to you. We're getting married in 3 weeks. Wild horses, rustlers, or blizzards, I'll be there." Tears threatened, but Beatrice blinked them back, determined to be as strong as the frontier women she had come to admire. "I'll hold you to that promise, Matthew Xavier." Their kiss was brief but fierce. Full of the emotions neither could fully express: fear, love, determination, and the promise of a future together. The posse departed an hour later, 12 grim-faced men led by Sheriff Cooper, an experienced lawman who had tracked outlaws across 3 territories. Matthew rode near the front, his rifle across his saddle, his blue scarf, Beatrice's Christmas gift, wrapped around his neck despite the mild spring day. Beatrice watched until they disappeared from sight, then returned to Dr. Peterson's office to check on Michael. The doctor had finished treating the wound and had given Michael laudanum for the pain, leaving him drowsy but comfortable. "He'll stay here tonight," Dr. Peterson told her. Tomorrow, if all looks well, he can move to the hotel until he's strong enough to return to the ranch. Thank you, doctor, Beatrice said. She approached Michael's bedside, taking his good hand. Is there anything you need? Anything I can do? Michael's eyes, so like his brother's, focused on her with effort. Just take care of the ranch while we're both away, he murmured. Cookie knows what needs doing, but he'll need someone to make decisions if we're gone more than a day or two. The request surprised her, but Beatrice nodded firmly. I'll ride out first thing tomorrow, she promised. The ranch will be waiting when you both return. A ghost of a smile crossed Michael's face before the laudanum pulled him under. New Matt chose well, he mumbled as his eyes closed. The next morning, after checking on Michael and finding him improved, Beatrice rode to the X-Bar Ranch on a gentle mare borrowed from the livery stable. Mrs. Holloway had objected to her going alone, but Beatrice was determined to honor her promise to Michael and to keep herself busy during the anxious wait for news of the posse. Cookie, the grizzled ranch cook who also served as foreman in the Xavier brothers' absence, met her in the yard with surprise that quickly gave way to relief when she explained her presence. Thank the Lord, he said, removing his hat briefly. We've been wondering what to do about the calving. Got 3 cows ready to drop any time, and not enough hands to watch 'em all with half the boys off with the posse. Beatrice spent the day learning more about ranch operations than she had in all her previous visits combined. Cookie showed her the books where the Xaviers kept meticulous records of their stock, the spring calving schedule, and the rotation of pastures. When a ranch hand reported a cow in distress in the south pasture, Beatrice rode out with them, watching in fascination as they helped deliver a healthy calf. By evening, she was exhausted but satisfied with her day's work. She had sent 2 of the younger hands to town with supplies for Michael and instructions to bring back any news of the posse. But they returned with no updates beyond the fact that the sheriff had sent a telegram from a settlement 20 miles west, reporting they were still on the rustlers' trail. Beatrice spent the night in Matthew's room, surrounded by his belongings, his books on the shelf, his spare boots by the door, his mother's quilt on the bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, her mind filled with worries about Matthew facing danger in the wilderness. The next day brought more ranch work, more calves born, and still no word from the posse. Beatrice rode back to town to check on Michael, finding him sitting up in bed at the hotel, irritable but healing well. Any news? He asked immediately. Nothing yet, Beatrice replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. But Cookie says that's not unusual. The rustlers were heading into rough country. Michael nodded grimly. Matt's a good tracker, better than me. If anyone can find them, he will. She returned to the ranch that evening, settling into a routine of dividing her time between the school, where a substitute was handling her classes, Michael's bedside in town, and the ranch operations. 5 days passed with no word, then 6, then 7. On the 8th day, as Beatrice was reviewing the ranch accounts in Matthew's office, she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Heart racing, she ran to the window, then to the door, praying for the sight of Matthew's familiar figure. Instead, she found Sheriff Cooper, his face grave as he dismounted slowly, as if every movement caused him pain. Behind him, 2 ranch hands led a horse carrying what was unmistakably a body wrapped in a blanket. The world seemed to stop, sound fading as Beatrice stood frozen in the doorway. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when they were so close to their future together. Miss Vance, Sheriff Cooper said, removing his hat, I'm sorry to bring bad news. Beatrice couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Cookie appeared beside her, his weathered face creased with dread. We caught up to the rustlers yesterday, the sheriff continued. There was a firefight. We recovered the cattle, but he glanced back at the blanketed form. No, Beatrice whispered, her voice breaking. Please, no, it's Peterson, Sheriff Cooper said. Jim Peterson. One of the rustlers shot him when we closed in. Relief hit Beatrice so hard her knees nearly buckled. Not Matthew, thank God, not Matthew. Matthew, she managed to ask. Took a bullet in the leg, the sheriff explained. Not serious, but it slowed him down. He's about an hour behind us with the rest of the posse and the recovered cattle. insisted we bring Peterson's body ahead to his family. Cookie steadied Beatrice with a hand on her elbow. The boss is all right then, ornery as ever, Sheriff Cooper confirmed with a sad smile. Wouldn't let us carry him, just bandaged his leg and kept riding. Said to tell you not to worry, Miss Vance. Said he'll keep his promise. The hour that followed was the longest of Beatrice's life. She helped Cookie prepare for the returning men hot coffee brewing, bandages ready, food warming on the stove. When they finally heard the approaching riders, she ran out to the porch, scanning the group for Matthew. He rode at the back, his face drawn with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes lit up when he saw her waiting. Sliding carefully from his horse, he tested his injured leg, grimacing but remaining upright as Beatrice flew down the steps and into his arms. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered against his chest, breathing in his scent beneath the dust and sweat of the trail. Matthew's arms tightened around her. "Never," he promised hoarsely. "I told you nothing could keep me from returning to you. Later, after doctor." Peterson's son had properly cleaned and bandaged Matthew's wound, a bullet graze along his thigh that looked worse than it was, and the exhausted posse members had been fed and bedded down in the bunkhouse. Beatrice and Matthew sat together on the porch, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Michael told me how you've been managing things," Matthew said, his hand warm around hers. "Cookie can't stop singing your praises, says you've got more sense about cattle than most men he knows." Beatrice smiled. "I've been learning. It seemed the best way to honor my promise to Michael and to keep from worrying myself sick about you." Matthew's expression grew serious. "Seeing you here, taking care of my home, my ranch, my brother, it made coming back even more important. This is where you belong, B. Where we belong together." 3 weeks later, on a perfect spring day with wildflowers carpeting the meadows around Silver Creek, Beatrice Vance became Beatrice Xavier in the white clapboard church, filled to overflowing with townspeople, ranch families, and her aunt and uncle from Boston, who had arrived the previous day after the long journey west. Michael, his arm still in a sling but otherwise recovered, stood as Matthew's best man, while Martha Jenkins's daughter Emma served as Beatrice's bridesmaid. Mrs. Holloway dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony, while Cookie, uncomfortably dressed in his Sunday best, beamed from the front pew as if watching his own children marry. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew's kiss was both tender and triumphant, a promise kept, a future secured. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness, of belonging that she had never experienced in Boston. The wedding breakfast at the hotel was a joyous affair, with speeches from Michael and Mr. Hargrove, music from local fiddle players, and enough food to feed half the county. Even the Winters family attended, Bernard Winters offering stiff congratulations while his wife maintained a thin-lipped smile. Remarkable how a woman pushed into the street in tears could end up the most envied bride in the territory, Martha Jenkins observed to Beatrice with a knowing smile. "Sometimes fate has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be." Looking across the room at Matthew, handsome in his new suit as he laughed with his brother, Beatrice could only agree. From that moment of terror in the street to this day of joy, her journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. That evening, as Matthew drove her home to the X-Bar, her home now, truly and legally, Beatrice reflected on the path that had brought her west. The loss of her parents, the advertisements for teachers in frontier towns, the decision to leave everything familiar behind all had led her to this moment, riding beside the man she loved toward a future bright with promise. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" Matthew asked, his arm around her on the wagon seat. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I do have one question." "What's that? Do you think the school board will allow me to continue teaching next year now that I'm a married woman?" It was a concern she had harbored but hesitated to voice, not wanting to dampen their happiness. Matthew smiled. "I had a word with Hargrove about that. The board took a vote last week unanimously in favor of keeping you on, married or not." Seems the parents are quite adamant about wanting the best teacher Silver Creek has ever had to continue educating their children. Relief and joy washed over her. So I can have both the ranch and the school? Both and more, Matthew promised, his eyes warm with love. Whatever you want, Bea, whatever makes you happy, that's what I want for our life together. As the X-bar came into view, silhouetted against the sunset, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. From the moment Matthew had lifted her from that dusty street and walked her safely home, their paths had been intertwined, leading them to this shared future on the land they both loved. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," Matthew said softly as they crossed under the ranch arch. "Home," Beatrice echoed, the word carrying all the promise of the years ahead, years of love and work, challenges and joys, all shared together in this wild, beautiful land that had brought them to each other.